I'll start by, I'm sorry, Alvina, but I'll start by introducing myself. My name is David van Bunder from HOGENT University of Applied Sciences and Arts, where I work as a researcher and a teacher, and we have been a part from this project from the very beginning. The topic I worked on in this project is incorporating different cultural perspectives in the classroom. It's a little bit of a different angle on the same topic that was treated by Sisa and Marina this morning, and I think my approach to this question was influenced to a great extent by the interviews we did with teachers. So in the beginning of this project we interviewed 5 or more teachers in every country, and all the Belgian teachers told me that when teaching international classes, people who are similar, they tend to group together. So people from Spain and Mexico, they speak the same language, so they sit together, but also international students and local students, they tend to be a bit separate. And they told me there was not a lot of interaction between these students. The teachers I spoke to specifically told me that they would be interested in a formation on multicultural teaching, on the condition that it was not too theoretical, and I tried to take into account that when writing the chapter for the book, but a big problem is that I am not a practical man. I am a philosopher by formation, so I'm more of a theory guy. We'll see how that works out today. I'll start with a lecture, and then I prepared some material that you can discuss in groups, because the colleagues whom I interviewed, some of them had participated in a European initiative to bring together teachers with international students and have them talk together and exchange ideas, and that was an approach that they highly valued. So talking about cases or talking about specific interventions with other teachers. Apart from that, I think my approach is also highly influenced by my own field of research and interest. My main field of research is on what some people call class migration, so people being born into a specific social class and mainly through education ending up in a higher social class. And some people say that is a form of migration too, because you end up in a different culture than the one you were born in. And another interest which I will talk specifically about today is professional socialization, which basically is again a different lens on the same issue. Professional socialization is about students entering higher education, coming from secondary education, and they are all more or less the same. They are formed by secondary education, and 3 or 4 or 5 years later you have these different kind of students that graduate, and they have different ideas, different values based on the field of study they did. For example, a social worker will have not completely different, but will have moderately different values from, for example, a nurse, and they will have a different approach to the profession. So to start with, that's a bit where I'm coming from with what I am presenting to you today. In the chapter, I will not repeat everything I have written in the chapter, because you can read the book. But in the chapter, I tried to describe different ways in which teachers and that's the difference, I think, with CISA. With me, it was really on a more individual level. We talked about the curriculum. I approached it from the point of view of when you're a teacher in front of a class, what can you do to incorporate different cultural perspectives. And in the chapter in the book, I talk about the course material. I talk about student interactions, especially in multicultural classes where you actually have the material of the different cultures sitting in front of you. I talk about self-assessment tasks for students, and I talk about the grading process that you can apply as a teacher, because it also became very clear from the interviews we did that the grading in different countries can be quite different from one country to another. For example, one of the teachers told me that he graded a German student with a 17 on 20, which in Belgium is a phenomenally well point. You've been really exceptional. But the German student was very disappointed because he said they're going to look at my grades in order to decide on this, on that, and I only have a 17. And so those are things that you not necessarily do take into account when you're grading a student. It's a bit like you told us too this morning, you're doing the things you're used to do. So I will not end, it will be the middle part of this talk with quickly summarizing these different strategies. But I want to start with tackling an issue which, according to me, makes the entire multicultural experience quite difficult, and that is the notion of culture. What is culture and what is our relation to culture? And why is it not evident and not easy to think about our own culture? For example, this morning when CISA gave us the task to think about the hidden curriculum, there's a reason they call it a hidden curriculum. It's because we also are not aware that we are applying so it's very, very difficult to become conscious of what is your own hidden curriculum. It's easy to say that to someone else. I see you're grading this person on this and this criterion, so that's strange because we don't do that. And I want to talk about why I think it is so difficult. Then I will quickly discuss the 4 strategies that I found in research and thought of myself in the chapter. And I will end with talking about 2 or 3 different ways in which you can try to become more conscious of your own cultural biases that might be guiding you in your teaching practice. I'm not going to repeat all that, it's clearly in the book, and I think you already are convinced that those things are important since you are here in a training for multicultural perspectives. That's also a bit what I explained just now, and then just to start, and I'm a bit embarrassed by the close presence of 2 Spanish people, because I would like to show you a fragment from a movie of the Spanish director Buñuel. My amor is not very well developed. It's a fragment from, so for those people who don't know Buñuel, he was a surrealist director, and he always made these, he started by making really crazy movies with Salvador Dali, and he ended up making more or less realistic movies, but with what in Dutch we would call a surrealistic sauce on top of it. So there's these small elements, and the movie from which this fragment comes, Le Fantôme de la Liberté, The Phantom of Liberty, it's not a classic story, but you're following something that's happening to a person, and then you meet someone else, and you forget about the first person, and you're following the second, and so on. So it's more of a collection of fragments. And this is a fragment I particularly always liked. I hope this works. Look too good.
Yeah.
No. Oh.
No.
I see the sound isn't working, so I will just tell you what's happening. There are a couple of couples meeting up for a nice and cozy gathering. If you would know any better, you might think they're going to have dinner. Well, I think you get the picture. I think this is funny. I'm not sure about you, but I think this is funny because it's the opposite of what we're used to doing. We get together with friends to enjoy a lovely meal or a lovely drink, and then when we have to pee or poo, we discreetly and politely close ourselves off in a small room which we lock, and then when we were in Ephesus, I took a picture of the latrines. The Greeks and the Romans were more these kind of guys. But in a way, seeing these images confronts us with things we never, or almost never put into question. Why do we think of eating as something that can be socially shared, and of defecating as something that we need to do in private? And the answer, of course, is culture. Culture consists of different beliefs, that is, ideas about how the world works, different values, which are things we think are important for guiding our actions, different norms, which are kind of boundaries. When you transgress them, you get sanctioned. There are social rules on how to interact with each other, how to talk to each other, how to look at each other, how not to look at each other, and systems of meaning. That might be religious belief systems, but that also might be more economic, philosophical belief systems. And we very often take these things for granted. And I think that's exactly the entire purpose of culture. We're here to put into question culture, whereas culture is something that is made not to ask questions. Culture is something that surrounds us and that is part of us, and one of the main functions of culture is to not have to think about everything you're doing and thinking. It's a bit of an autopilot that lets you act and interpret and do stuff like that. So the very goal of culture is to organize groups of people and their interactions so that it becomes doable. Just try to imagine for 1 second that you have to deliberate about every action you're going to take. Am I going to use my fork? Am I going to use my knife? Will I pour water in the glass or not? Will I do this? Will I do that? So culture is something that is actually made to reduce this kind of workload from our brain. Another interesting point, I think, is that culture is not something that just surrounds us. Culture is not something that is in the streets, in the city, on the countryside, but culture is also internalized. It becomes a part of who we are and how we think of ourselves and what we think is important and stuff like that. And that happens through the process of socialization. So you don't get born with certain ideas or values or norms. These norms exist in the world around you, in the social world, and by navigating this social world, you kind of decipher all the rules, all the belief systems, and they become part of who you are. That happens, of course, in the process of growing up and being educated, but I will show you that it happens also very often later on in life. For example, when learning a profession, you're being socialized into the values and the norms, in short, the culture of the profession. And I think that process is also very often what happens to students going from one culture to another. And because culture is so deeply connected to the feeling of identity that we have, we don't question it. We consider it to be self-evident and something that is natural. And I think that is precisely the reason why it's very often so difficult to reflect on our own cultural bias. I think we very often need someone or something else to make us capable of doing that reflective exercise. And then again, of course, everyone is part of different cultures. We're not only influenced by one culture. I think, for example, we are all academics. That is a very specific kind of people. And if you go across the room, and you would put Belgian, I don't know, builders, or Bulgarian builders and Turkish builders, you would get some kind of common ground too, but it would be different from our common ground. And then of course there are the age differences. People who are 20 and discovering the world behave in different ways, value different things than people who are 50 and, well, life is starting to end by 50. And cultures are not static. Cultures are evolving, and very often they are evolving by interaction with other cultures. And so the rate at which cultures evolve might also differ. I think the last, let's say, 60 or 70 years after the Second World War, I think cultures are evolving at a much faster pace than, let's say, between 500 and 800 after Christ. Okay, I will show you a picture now, and it's a very nice picture, and at first you might think it is a very multicultural setting because you have groups of different skin color working there, and it probably is a multicultural setting, but when looked at with another lens, it is a very monocultural setting because everyone is wearing the same clothes, everyone is wearing the same glasses, everyone is doing the same thing, everyone probably thinks that the same things are important, everyone adheres to the same probably professional values and stuff like that. So I think this picture illustrates the different levels of culture that always exist, and what is multicultural in one way might be monocultural in another way, and vice versa. So I think it's important when talking about multiculturality that we're not only focusing on cultures as products of different countries or products of different civilizations, but it's also products of different professional groups, products of different ages, and so forth. The socialization process, the professional socialization process, was studied by Fred Davis. I think it was an American sociologist, and at one moment I became very interested in professional socialization because I used to teach sociology to nurses, and I also still do teach communication at a social work class. And maybe not every year, but every couple of years it happened that a student whom I had in the first semester in the psychology class in nursing ended up being in my communication class in the second semester in social work. And when I talked to them, they always complained about how they didn't fit in the medical world or in the nursing world. Whereas probably when starting their studies, they're more or less the same, and then they start their studies and there are demands. There is socialization and accultural, I'm not sure if that even in English word, accultural. Thank you, Lindsay. And then people start to change, and then with some people it's a good match, and with other people it isn't a good match. And one of the places this socialization takes place in the school, in the aula, where you're teaching your students. It's also taking place when you have practical classes, but for the nurses it's mainly taking place during internships. Yeah, so outside of it's connected to the curriculum, but it's actually happening in the part of the curriculum that resembles daily life the most, with interactions with professionals. And in those interactions, these nursing students, they internalize the values, the norms, the ways of dealing of the profession, or they don't. And if they don't, it becomes very difficult for them to succeed. And I think that's a very good example of what Cesar called the hidden curriculum, because there we take into account different kinds of criteria that are nowhere made explicit. We try to be very explicit on what we grade, but for example, the way in which you address an internship supervisor, that's not made explicit anywhere. Another example, I'm looking at Sabine, because Sabine is part of the speech and language pathology department. I'm also part of the same department, but the way students are allowed to interact with teachers is quite different. In the speech and language pathology department, students are not allowed to address you by your first name. They have to say sir or miss and then your last name, whereas in the social work department it's quite common to be addressed by your first name by the students. And nowhere the students aren't made aware that there's this difference. They have to find out for themselves, and the process of finding out, that is the socialization process. And again, you see the combination of the two things. On the one hand, it's a social process. You are entering a group, you are becoming part of a group, and on the other hand, at the same time, it's also something that is transforming your own identity. Not completely, of course, we're not schizophrenic, you're not becoming a completely different person, but on a professional level, your identity gets changed by that. And something that also very often happens is that there is, at least during a certain period, there is a tension between the two. A tension between the old identity and the tension and the new identity, because they aren't always the same. The interesting thing about Davis is that in his research, he differentiated between 6 stages. I think it was 6, I'm not sure, but I think stages are always very interesting if you interpret them in the right way, not as things that exist in the world out there, but as categories of the mind to add a little order in the chaos of the world. And first stage, the stage of the initial innocence, is where people actually have no idea, or only lay beliefs, not professional beliefs, about what the profession is. You could compare that to generalizations or stereotypes with regard to culture. For example, Spanish people can't live without their siestas. That would be a lay perception of Spain. But for example, for nurses, those lay perceptions might include being a good nurse means that you are empathic, that you have empathy. Being a good nurse means that you are a caring person. I can assure you, after 4 years, none of our students will say those are qualities of a good nurse. You see after the 4 years of training that what constitutes a good nurse, that's a nurse who is good in technical nursing actions, a nurse who masters the profession and not just being caring or so there is this change. And then in the beginning of their formation, they recognize that what they think the profession is and what the profession actually is, that it's quite different, and it's kind of making them uncomfortable. They're feeling not at ease. And then the second phase starts, and they try to figure out which behaviors are valued. And they try to figure out, how does this world work? How does this culture work? What do I need to do to be valued? What do I need to think to be valued by my supervisor and stuff like that? And then in the next phase, they try to actively simulate those behaviors. So they consciously think, now I have to do this, now I have to do that, but they don't actually mean it, or they don't actually believe it. And that's what happens in the next phase and the last phase. These things that they are first just doing, they get internalized and become part of who they think they are, or not, but then they probably have left the profession by then. So, again, culture is at the intersection of our sense and our self, or our sense of self and our belonging to a group. So it's when you think about that, it's really something. It's not just, and I might insult some people over here, I'm not sure, but it's not just supporting a certain football team. You could theoretically change that quite easy. Changing cultures is not that simple. And how can we make culture explicit? Very often it is by being confronted with people who do things differently. That's my Bunder fragment. And very often this confrontation comes with some kind of friction, some kind of feeling of being unease, and also some kind of loss of identity, the feeling that you're getting transformed. And this is the part where I got to in the online training, but in the meantime I have been thinking a bit more about that, and I will end the theoretical part in a couple of minutes with some ideas on how you might try to become aware of your own culture without having to travel to Brazil or China or whatever. But first I quickly want to talk about the four ways in which I described in the chapter in which you can incorporate multiple cultural perspectives in the classroom. And the most evident, and I think that basically goes without saying, is including examples and resources that at least reflect the different cultural backgrounds of the students. So one immediate advantage of that is that they have the feeling that they're being welcomed, but another advantage, of course, is that it can serve as examples for other students on how cultures can be different without being necessarily better or worse than another. If possible, you can invite guest speakers in your classes to talk about topics that you have been treating yourself. You can include text fragments in your syllabus, and I think, since I also already said that too, I think it's important to move beyond symbolic diversity. You can be very inclusive, but only in words. You also have to be inclusive. You can discuss with people, I'm coming back to that part, and you need to try to reflect on the influence of your own background. That's on the part of the teacher. How can the teacher, from his background, try to introduce different cultural perspectives when he's dealing with a classroom? But again, if you're teaching a multicultural classroom, you have the material in front of you. If you're teaching a class with students from Spain and Germany and Romania, you have different cultures sitting in your class, so you might as well use them as a resource. You can use icebreaker activities. We have done 2 or 3 of them yesterday with Barbora, but you could also, for example, ask the students or different students every course to bring some kind of cultural artifacts from his own culture to the lesson, and then just start the lesson by letting the student talk for 5 minutes about what it means and why it's important for him. You could ask students to describe a traditional meal. We have been talking for 2 days about the nuances between Turkish and Bulgarian foods in the cafeteria. Well, I can assure you Belgian food is a bit different again. And those stories will almost always not end with the food. You'll start talking about other aspects of daily life that are important to the students. You could ask what a typical family gathering looks like. I don't know how it happens in other countries, but in Belgium it is mandatory to have a nice family meeting, and then at one point one of the uncles has drank too much and starts saying things that are a bit inappropriate. That's how we do it in Belgium, a typical family gathering. It might be different in other countries. So these kind of small things you could use at the start of your lessons. You could have students work together, and I think it's important that you're actually mixing them up, because it's the same with local students. When you say form a group, they always form the same groups. I think we were exactly the same when we were students, and maybe still when we are teachers. So try to mix them up, that the cultural difference is present in the groups, and try thinking of real world problems related to the content of your course, that in which the different cultural backgrounds might be important. For example, for social work, we might give them an assignment on mental health, and I think in many different cultures there are many misconceptions about mental health, and you could ask them to work together on the different misconceptions and what they have in common and what's different between them. Reflection and self-assessment. So you can give your students tasks in which you kind of force them to think about differences. It's one thing to be confronted with cultural differences. It's a completely other thing to also reflect on them. You can encounter them and then just let them go, but you can also use them as the material for a reflection. And you could, for example, ask them to keep a journal from their daily life, because again, as Sisa already said, and many of the teachers I interviewed said exactly the same. Most of the learning, not most, but a lot of the learning happens outside of the classroom in daily life. So you could ask them to keep a journal of their experiences with regard to being in a different culture. That might help them identify gaps in their intercultural understanding. You could ask them to write cultural autobiographies. That is kind of the story of their life, but not from the point of view of their individual life, but from the point of view of their culture. And of course make them talk in the class. And then the grading, I have to say, I think for me personally, I think that's the most difficult part, because that's where we're very often really stuck to what we're used to, and where we very often also have no idea about how people are graded in other countries. And so here the tips are, but these might be beneficial for all students, to make your grading criteria as transparent as possible, and I try to do that for an imaginary course in philosophy that I might have given, and I found it a very, very difficult exercise. You could also try to use different grading forms. I mean, you could have an exam, you could have an oral presentation, because some cultures are less directed towards the speaking in front of the class. Other cultures are more knowledge-based, other are more about interaction. So when you're grading international students, you might try to think of a grading system in which different grading traditions could be valued. I'm not going to. You'll get the PowerPoints, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going to discuss this, but this is my imaginary grading system for a philosophy course in which students have to critically analyze. I dare you to try and make critically analyze something as transparent as possible. I find that very, very difficult. But other things are a bit more easier. But participation in class discussions. What does that mean the same thing for a student who is used to the Belgian system as for a student who is used to the Mexican system? Or so these are things I'll let you look in the PowerPoint. Then I want to end with I said 2 or 3, let's make that 2.5 ways in which you can try to become aware of your cultural bias. The first one is a tool that we quite often use in Flemish higher education. It's the Johari window. I don't know if you are familiar with that. Yeah? Okay. So the Johari window is a system of visualizing what you are knowing about yourself and what you are not knowing about yourself, and what others know about yourself and what others don't know about yourself. So I am a philosophy major. I used to be a philosophy major. You all know that because I told you, and I know that too. My blind spots, that's what happens when I'm dining with my colleagues and then I'm going to the toilet, and while I'm away they say, he's at it again, he's doing it again, and it's always the same. I'm completely unaware, I'm thinking I'm funny and stuff like that, but
you are not.
I'm not, no, definitely not. So that's my blind spot. I'm not aware of that, but everyone around me is. Then there are things, I'm not going to tell you which I'm aware of, but you are not.
Yeah.
And then this is the most interesting thing, I think, these two. There is also the part of yourself that you are not aware of and others are not aware of. And the Johari window also with regards to your multicultural, the way you teach multicultural classes, these two fields of the Johari window are something that you can use to not use, but the goal would be to uncover parts of these fields that are not known to yourself. And so I devised a kind of an exercise that you could do with teachers at your university who also teach or who might not teach a multicultural class. That might be an interesting task too. And you start with an individual reflection where you of course think about the open area and the hidden area, and then you ask for feedback on the other two from another teacher. And you can discuss, but I think that's up to you, because some of those things might be very personal, but you can also end up with a group discussion. Then something that maybe I think might be more interesting is what is called the fish bowl method. I'm not sure whether any of you has ever heard about that. No. It's something that I came across, and I put it in here just to have a little bit of Dutch in this meeting, in a Dutch magazine, which were discussing an American foundation, which was established, I think, on the day, or maybe the day after, the election of Trump in 2016. And the name of the organization is Braver Angels. And Braver, yeah, Braver Angels. And it's a civilian, or an organization of civilians who are deeply worried about the growing polarization in American society, where families are torn, or at least were torn apart at that period. And yeah, I think you don't have to look to America to see the growing polarization. I think we can watch exactly the same thing happening in almost every country in Europe. And so how can you keep talking to each other without fighting, or saying let's end this let's end this conversation and keep talking, not on an individual level, but really, how can you keep talking between different groups who have completely different, completely opposite ideas about how society should be organized and work. And they used the fishbowl method, and so what they did was they put a group of Trump supporters in a circle in a room and let them discuss. And then there was a second circle outside with Clinton supporters or Democratic voters. And the outer circle wasn't allowed to intervene. They were just allowed to observe and follow the discussion. And the idea was that by following these discussions, at the very least, people would become aware that their political opponents also cared about society. That at least that was something that they had in common. And I think this method might also be used, I think it might be a valuable way to combine the two questions of the colleagues I interviewed on having group discussions and talking about cases on the one hand and becoming aware of cultural bias, because my idea would be to have people discussing cases or interventions in an inner circle, having an outer circle with other teachers who aren't allowed to react or intervene, but they observe and they take notes, and after 15 or 20 or 25 minutes you have them give feedback on the discussion. And that might also be a means to make cultural bias more explicit. And then my half tip would be a website at Harvard University where you can take different questionnaires specifically with regard to different cultural biases. And so for the theoretical part, that's it. I propose taking a little break now.
Yeah.
10 minutes?
10 minutes is fine.
Okay.
Thank you very much, David.
You're welcome.
After 10 minutes break, now it is 14:23. Let's meet at